There are, as I understand it, two apologies. Councillor Keith House and Councillor Roger Price. Neither of them are here today, and welcome Tim Groves and Councillor Wayne Irish as their deputies. Thank you for coming to give us a full house again. That's good. Declarations of interest, we normally deal with those if there are any as and when they arise, and I'll leave that one to you. So item number 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was principally the item on Bunny Lane and hours of working. Are those minutes a correct record of what happened at that meeting? Are they approved? Approved. Thanks for that. Deputations, we've got, as far as I can see, 4 deputations today. We've got 3 on Bunny Lane. We've got the member from the Parish Council who will be speaking. We've also got John Palmer and Michael Woodall, who for the applicant, who have both got between them 10 minutes. And we've got County Councillor Nick Adams-King, who is the member for that division to which this item relates. So you will all have 10 minutes to speak. And we have one person speaking on the second item on Blue Haze. So that's where we are with deputies, and I'll introduce them as and when necessary. So we then go on to item number 5, which is Chairman's announcements. The announcement I'm going to make is that actually this is the last meeting we're going to have before the summer recess. That is because a decision was made yesterday to delay the hearing of the application for the ERF at Alton. What you should know is that basically the timescales for achieving a hearing on the 28th of July were really tight, and they were specifically tight following the end of the last Regulation 25 consultation. There was a need to make changes to our draft report, and based on discussions with the officers had yesterday, they wanted to dot the I's, cross the T's, ensure that everything was absolutely right before it is published. And for that reason, and if it were to be published, in order to get the hearing on the 28th of July, it would need to be published by next Monday, which is not enough time to do it. The decision has therefore been made that it will be postponed until the autumn. I'm not going to mention any specific dates in the autumn. All I can say is I remember when this first came to be a possibility, there was a mention that it was going to be in February. So it has been put back because of the enormity of the item, and I'm not going to push for any date at this stage. If Lisa wants to say anything more about dates, she's welcome to. No. Okay.
Not at this stage, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so we will then move on to the first item, or item number 6 on the agenda, which is the Bunny Lane application. And it is, you will remember, a revised application to vary conditions 2, 9 and 10 of the appeal decision, which goes back to 2012. I think it's just worth looking at the wording of the application, which is to reshape and improve the existing peripheral northeastern landscape bund in order to facilitate enhanced screening from wider views into the site. And those of us who went to the site visit last week will have seen exactly where that is and what improvements would be made there. The second part of this application is to accommodate the temporary wash plant operation in the southern section of the site for a period of 12 months only. And we all saw where it was. We also heard it operating. And I think the important thing is how important site visits are when looking at applications. It told us so much more about this application and our understanding of it, which perhaps wasn't there when the original application came forward. As far as that is concerned, members will know that the application came forward in December of last year, and the committee decided not to approve that application on the grounds it would have an unacceptable and detrimental impact on the landscape changes. And the majority view of that committee was that it would also have a detrimental effect on the countryside setting. We have all seen that setting now. So I'm not going to say anything more on the application itself. Lisa Kirby-Hawke, I think you want to introduce the item, and then Tim Felsted is going to give a full report. So over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. As you're aware, I am not Sam, so the case officer, unfortunately, is unavailable today due to sickness. So both myself and Tim, who sat beside me, will be leading the item this morning. As you know, Councillor Latham's given a really good introduction. The majority of the committee visited the site last week. So you've seen the existing site in its location, and that has been operating under that appeal consent since 2012. And Tim in his presentation will go through a bit more detail about what the site looks like, the distinct areas on site, and the operations that already take place on site. Councillor Latham's already mentioned about the reasons for refusal. Those for new members in particular who weren't around in December are set out in paragraphs 25 and 28 of your report before you. And what this revised application essentially looks to do is to address those concerns that the committee had in December in relation to noise and in relation to landscaping. The key thing to note is this is a temporary permission. They're asking for a 12-month planning permission here. This is not a permanent facility, and the reason for that is the operator is looking, in particular with regards to the wash plant, about the viability of having that piece of kit on site to address the in situ construction and demolition waste material they've got on site, but also with a view to see how the market reacts to that material being able to take to market. Now, when we were on site, we had quite a lot of discussion about what the wash plant can produce, and quite a lot of discussion as well about the economics and the need for this proposal. And so your report documents a lot of that in relation to aggregate supply in paragraphs 92 to 102 in the main report. Some really important things to note since the site visit is that myself and Tim have been in constant discussions over the last week to try and improve the noise mitigation conditions that are on site. So in your main report, you will see we'd already included an additional new condition, which is condition 8. That has been reworked in the last week alongside some of the other conditions relating to noise and other matters. And those are all documented in your update report. And the result of those discussions has meant that the Environmental Health Officer has now given a revised comment on the application and not objecting to the proposal, subject to the changes to the conditions that we have made. And I think as officers, we feel now we think we've strengthened the conditions significantly, and we've got much more enforceable conditions to ensure that the noise monitoring and noise mitigation measures are implemented appropriately going forward. So please make sure you've had a look at your update report. Tim will go through that, as I say, in a little more detail in a moment. And the final thing I just want to mention is that this site doesn't have an existing liaison panel. And you'll note in the commentary in the main report and in the informatives that we have requested for a liaison panel to be set up. Now, there are other sites in the area that have panels that work in such a way. And so we feel that as officers that it's important that this site has a liaison panel, particularly given the issues that have come up through these last two applications. So I'm going to hand over to Tim now to lead you through the presentation. Both of us will be able to answer any questions that you may have later on in the item, as both of us do know the site very well. So Sam being here isn't a limitation on the knowledge of the site, just to give you some reassurance. So thank you very much, Tim.
Yes, good morning, members. As was introduced, it's an application to vary 3 conditions of an existing appeal decision regarding an existing commercial recycling operation at Salvage Farm, Bunny Lane in Timsbury. The proposal seeks to allow changes to the installation, of a wash plant and to provide improvements to the bunds surrounding the site. This is a location map, a little more zoomed out than we might normally present. This is to show the position of Romsey relative to the site. Site location is up at the top of the map here, outlined in red. You'll see Romsey, 3.2 kilometres or 2 miles to the south. The village of Timsbury, which is about 800 metres downhill from the site location. And then also the A3057, which runs through the village of Timsbury and connects to Bunny Lane here. So a little bit more of a zoomed in location map here. Location of Timsbury, 600 metres further down the hill. You'll see Bunny Lane, the site outlined in red again. Site entrance is located off Bunny Lane in the southeast corner of the site. 3 other locations that I decided to add to this map, which I felt would be useful, are Casbrook Fields. This is about 700 metres north of the location of the wash plant on the site. Hilltop, which is a residence just to the north west of the site, about 450 metres north of the wash plant. And then Cranford Farm. The reason I highlight Casbrook Fields and Cranford Farm is that they're locations that are subject to a noise condition in the existing appeal decision. And then Hilltop is relevant for other noise discussions later. So this aerial is useful to show some of the surrounding land uses. So to the north and the east, you'll see this is a restored landfill, the old Bunny Lane landfill. These operations at the site location, this site was actually developed as part of the Bunny Lane landfill. Again, the village of Timsbury. To the west and south are primarily agricultural uses. It's also worth pointing out further along Bunny Lane the BKP hazardous waste commercial hazardous waste facility, as well as a Hampshire County Council household waste recycling centre. Again, just showing the locations of Hilltop, Casbrook Fields and Cranford Farm. So this is the site plan for the existing site. It's useful to show you this as an overview. Site entrance down in the southeast corner. In the northern third, we have allowance for a concrete recycling as well as a crusher. So this would occur in the northwest corner. Northeast corner allows some additional storage of materials for the crushing. Recovered soils are stored in one large stockpile, and then waste soils are stored in another large stockpile. I've highlighted here, this is a section of bunding that's proposed to be improved as part of this application. A small section just next to a gate in the northeast corner up here, and then a longer stretch along the side here on the east. In the middle third is a materials recovery facility. This is essentially a picking station that collects the commercial material that comes into the site. where it's sorted into different waste streams and then exported from the site again. Since this site plan was approved, there's been a subsequent permission that allowed a 2-storey office building and welfare facilities. And you'll also see here there is a weighbridge associated with the operation, and then parking and storage just to the south of this. In the lower third, was approved for foam mix processing of road planings, as well as some wood shredding activities down in the southwest corner. Again, this is behind a 4-metre bund. I tried to highlight this area. This is the location of the wash plant, and you'll see the bunding here. Just this northern part of the area there is what's proposed for an increase in height of the bunding, as well as some additional planting along the whole of that bund. So this would be the revised site plan should this application be granted. Again, just highlighting the stretch of the bund, this aerial shows the location of the waste stock soils and the process soils, the MRF facility, office building. And I've tried to highlight where the bunds would be that are proposed to be modified. And then this one shows the layout of where the wash plant would sit on the new site. Again, you can see some of the existing bunding and where the bunding would be raised in the future. So this is a photo taken of the wash plant looking north along the western site boundary. I've tried to label here, this bund is proposed to be increased from 2 metres as it currently exists, so that's what members will have seen on site during the site visit. That would be doubled in height to 4 metres, and then just behind these underground tanks here would be a retaining wall to support the uplift of that bund. Just in the bottom corner here is an existing 4-metre bund, so that's what some members walked up during the site visit. The top of the wash plant is about 9 metres high. So this is a section that was provided by the applicant. This provides a view from the corner of Bunny Lane. Just at the bottom of Bunny Lane is a garden centre and nursery. So you'll see location A here. This is the sight line that's been taken through the site. It shows the height of the wash plant, as well as the view that would be seen above the improved bund. Some additional plantings are also proposed to provide screening, and this goes back to some of the reasons that the application was refused initially in December. So the applicant has come back with modified plans regarding the screening. Sorry, I'll just go back and I'll just highlight that I'll show some photos, again, provided by the applicant. These are photo montages that try and illustrate the impact of the proposed screening at the site. So I'll just run through those. So in terms of the wash plant, I think it's useful to explain how the wash plant actually operates. Over on the right-hand side of the photo is a hopper. Essentially, this is a mechanical vibrating unit that would screen out larger material that's contained in the already screened soil. Effectively, it's a giant sieve that you might use in your own garden. That disaggregated material is then moved up a conveyor belt where a magnet would remove metals from any residual metals. It then goes into this unit at the very top here, at the very top of the conveyor. This is called an ag storm and essentially does the washing operation of the plant. Once the material has been washed, it's then separated into different sizes, and then those various sizes would arrive at the end of each of these conveyors into concrete bays. And then this larger grey unit on the left-hand side is a silt press. This deals with the residual silt that's left in the washed water, and this would essentially produce a cake of silt which the operator could dispose of at landfill, or they may try and find a commercial market. Another just quick photo of looking through the site. I mentioned the materials recycling facility. This is just the building on the left here. quite a modest facility compared to others that you might come across. The two-storey office building, and then just on the right of this photo, the weighbridge. You'll see the stockpiles in the background of this photo. So these are the photo montages I mentioned. So top photo is an existing photo, an existing view. This was taken in January 2021, so obviously before many things started to green up. So this is the view then. This is the photo montage showing what the impact would be once plantings have been added to the bunds and the bunds have been increased in height. This is taken from Bunny Lane, a field entrance just as you approach the site. Another one, this was taken from the bottom on the A3057 through the farmer's field. There's actually a hedgerow which separates the A3057. Again, you'll see the wash plant and the silt press at the top here, and then the impact once the visual screening has been added, just as a more zoomed out photo for context. And then this is taken towards the bottom of Heron Lane, again through a hedgerow. You can probably just make out the wash plant at the top here and the outline of the press building. Again, the impact once the bund and screening have been provided. Just a quick photo looking at the northwest corner of the site. These are the bunds that would be improved in height and also with some additional planting. This would provide some additional screening, especially for footpath users, which come up just outside the site here and then would turn north. So that's the view looking north. And again, the view looking south that shows the remaining length of the bund on the western side. So I mentioned that noise, and Lisa's mentioned that noise was something that we'd been working on for the last week to try and allay any concerns from the Environmental Health Officer at Test Valley and also some of the concerns from Michelmersh and Timsbury Parish Council. I mentioned that Casbrook Fields and Cranbourne Farm already have a limit of 40 decibels and there is a noise compliance scheme in place already as part of the existing appeal decision where proxy measurement locations and the proxy levels at those locations are to be applied. And then as part of the conditions, we have added Hilltop on Heron Lane as a further proxy condition in agreement with the applicant. And this is just because we want to try and ensure that the wash plant doesn't produce any excessive noise that would be detrimental to the setting. So in terms of the proposal, the applicant has the current permission has approved plans and schemes that do not feature these improvements to the bunds or the wash plant. And there's also a condition that says that no plant should exceed 4 meters. As I stated, the wash plant in parts is higher than that. And then condition 10 also doesn't allow for soil washing in that area. So foam mix activities and wood shredding are allowed activities in that area currently. And the applicant seeks to amend those conditions to allow their proposal. Other conditions, as I said, have been altered to try and mitigate any additional impacts that the wash plant would have on the site. Consultations and representations. So Test Valley Borough Council Environmental Health, as mentioned, they have now no objection subject to conditions that address a new receptor on Heron Lane with a 40 decibel limit, no operation prior to construction of noise attenuating features, and a verification exercise that demonstrates the site meets the noise limit. And that's to occur within the first 6 weeks of operation of the plant and after, obviously, the noise attenuating features have been installed, and a compliance strategy as well, so an update to the existing compliance strategy. Michelmersh and Timsbury Parish Council have objections over the visual impact of the wash plant. They believe the works of the bunds are unjustified. There was some comment about conflicting plans, but I believe they've been addressed in further submissions. Unacceptable impacts on the local community. The wash plant has already been installed, so this is obviously retrospective. And then concerns over the noise assessment and conditions. Again, we believe these might have been addressed in the new conditions. Bracefield Parish Council raised very similar concerns, but also discussed HCVs that are operating on the highway. No additional changes to the number of vehicles that will enter the site or the times that were approved at the last meeting will are proposed as part of this application. Councillor Perry and Adams King, they share concerns raised by the Parish Council and residents, but it's been acknowledged the benefits of the work that sites such as this provide. County Public Health, they're encouraged by the lack of stated impact on air pollution, noise pollution, transport and access, and they encourage any odours to be mitigated. It's not expected there will be any negative odour impacts as a result of the proposal. County Landscape initially had concerns about the planting schemes, but they've been satisfied by the additional information. They believe the schemes will help screen the plant adequately, but the implementation obviously is crucial. So planting and looking after the new planting is crucial to this. They did actually undertake a site visit to look at some of the preliminary planting that's been added that you'd have seen in the site visit, and they believe that many of the trees that have been planted are performing well. Obviously, there are some that need to be replaced, but that's often the case when planting like this occurs. Planning policy, that subject to satisfying other relevant policies, they believe this is a helpful contribution to Hampshire's targets for recycled and secondary aggregates. Rights of way, there's no direct impact. Again, there is a right of way that skirts around the site and is located in the northwest corner. Any improvements to the bund in that northwest corner would only be beneficial. And then in terms of public representations, we've had 45 representations from 38 respondents. In terms of reasons for objecting, many of these overlap with those provided by Micklemush and Timsbury Parish Council. Mentioned that the site operations are already in breach of planning conditions. Again, that's something the site operator is hoping the wash plant would alleviate. Impacts unacceptably on surrounding land, the use of waste for the bunds, and some thought this should be an environmental impact assessment development. So, but on review, officers have decided that this shouldn't be subject to an environmental impact assessment. So the main issues raised by the proposal: visual impact, noise impact, ecological impacts, protection of water environment, lack of justification, and the retrospective nature of the application. This last one is not a material consideration for the application. In terms of all of those issues, it's believed that with the conditions and the application as submitted, that the application is consistent and achieves all the relevant policies. So as a recommendation, planning permission should be granted subject to the conditions that are set out in Appendix A of this report and the updated and additional conditions laid out in the update report. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for that clear presentation. Can we now move on to the deputies? And the first deputy on this item is Councillor Bob Davis, Chairman of Micklemush and Timsbury Parish Council. Bob, you have got a total of 10 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. I'm the Chairman of Micklemush and Timsbury Parish Council. This site is in our parish, in the countryside, and it's close to our village. In our objections to the first application, which this committee refused in December last year, we raised two main issues: the potential effects of noise from the wash plant on our on-site neighbours, and the adverse impact of this large piece of industrial machinery on the character of the local landscape. The applicant has made some changes to the in this new revised application and provided more information. And in the last 24 hours, officers have revised the proposed planning conditions relating to noise. So our concerns about noise have been mostly allayed, not completely, but we continue to object strongly to this application. If I can cover the noise issue first. Noise from the wash plant's an issue we have been concerned about from the time of the first application when no information was provided. And our worries were confirmed when the wash plant was first operated in February this year. The additional noise from the site was immediately obvious and resulted in many complaints to the Parish Council and to Test Valley Environmental Health. There was an identifiable drone and rattling noise that could be heard 1 kilometre or more away on some occasions, depending on wind direction. During more recent operations, the noise level has been reduced. We don't know why it's changed. The measurements and observations by the firm's consultants say the noise is inaudible at any residence. Certainly last week, the 1st and 2nd of July, which was 2 or 3 days before your site visit, I did spend some time in the area and I confirmed that the noise was, on some occasions, audible, but much reduced compared with February. So the recent, and in the reports pack last week, some conditions were put forward which basically repeated the existing site noise conditions, the noise limit of 40 decibels as assessed against British Standard 4142. I have pointed out repeatedly that the existing condition only applied to 2 areas, it's Casbrook Fields and Cranford Farm, which you've heard about from Tim Felsted's map, and didn't cover many other houses which would be more affected by noise from the wash plant. The revised conditions do address this issue, the new conditions 7 and 8. They do address most of our concerns, although they don't seem to me to be completely watertight. I've not really had time to read them, they only appeared last evening. There are 1 or 2 things I think could be improved, and I think that Councillor Adams-King will refer to those. Could I point out that in making comments on noise, I am representing the Parish Council, but they are my professional opinion. I am an environmental noise consultant. I've been so for 50 years. I've given evidence at public inquiries. I've advised many local councils on drafting noise conditions, so I can claim some experience. But I'm not in the loop. All I can do is to make comments. I hope they've been constructive. But in conclusion, subject to robust conditions of the form suggested, perhaps with some modifications being applied, we accept that noise from the Waltep plant should not be an issue for our residents. I'll move on to our main concern, that's the visual impact of the wash plant and its effect on the local landscape. We do object to its being there. As you'll have seen last week, the plant is very large, 70 metres long, over 9 metres high. The site would be enclosed by 4 metre high earth bunds, and I'm particularly thinking about on the western side, but the plant exceeds the height of the bunds by more than 5 metres. The 2012 appeal, the inspector imposed a condition, that's condition 9, which served 2 fundamental purposes. No fixed plant or equipment would be visible from outside the site. Noise emitted from the bunds from these sources would be reduced by the screening effect of the bunds. Allowing plant to be visible above the perimeter bunds is in direct conflict with a key principle set out by the inspector when he granted planning permission in 2012. This is a sensitive countryside location. I'll quote from the submission by Test Valley Borough Council to this council when the company made its application to make this site permanent in 2012. This is their description of the site. The site is prominent, set on a ridge which forms the edge of one of the valley terraces of the Test Valley, with long and short views of the site to be gained from roads, dwellings, footpaths and bridleways, including from the long-distance path, the Test Way, across the valley. The wash plant is and will be clearly visible from the west and southwest and presents an alien feature in the landscape. It's not something you expect to see in the countryside. It's not a house or a barn, but obviously a large piece of industrial machinery. It isn't clear how this could be said to comply with Policy 13 of this Council's Minerals and Waste Plan. That says, minerals and waste development should not cause unacceptable adverse visual impact and should maintain and enhance the distinctive character of the landscape. We don't see any maintaining and enhancement here. This application was refused by this committee in December last year. The revised application shows modifications to the planting on the southwest bund near the wash plant. We don't believe that this additional planting will have any significant effect in obscuring views of the plant, which will be clearly visible above and through the trees, at least until these are fully matured. And that's not going to happen within the 12 months for which planning permission is sought. Whether we believe that this really is a 12-month application or merely a forerunner of a more permanent application, we don't know. But before you is a 12-month application. The screening effect of the trees is going to be virtually zero within that period. I know that many of you made a site visit last Monday, and you will have seen the plant from various viewpoints, no doubt. And you'll have formed a view on how visible the plant is from various points. Could I just make the observation that at this time of year, trees and hedges are in about as full leaf as they will ever be. And at this time, views of the site from some points are quite limited. That's not the situation for nearly half of the year. And certainly the site is very visible from points on the main road, 3057, which is regularly used by walkers and cyclists during the months when the trees are not in leaf. In summary, therefore, I repeat, we object to this application. We're still concerned about noise from the wash plant affecting neighbours, but with appropriate conditions, should allow any noise problems that might arise to be addressed. Although, as I say, these conditions have appeared very late in the day and we've not really had a chance to comment further on them. The wash plant, which was installed without planning permission, is causing and will continue to cause unacceptable harm to the local landscape. Allowing the wash plant to remain would drive a coach and horses, that's an outdated term, but I can't think of a more recent one, would drive a coach and horses through the fundamental principle adopted by the inspector in 2012 that no machinery would be visible above the perimeter bunds. We accept that the company provides a useful and necessary service, recycling, supplying aggregates. They provide local employment and contribute to the local economy. We also appreciate you have your officer's recommendation to approve, but we respectfully suggest that the revisions to the scheme since December are not sufficient to justify the previous decision of this committee to refuse the application to be reversed. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davis, you mentioned there was an audible noise from the wash plant when you were there on the 1st and 2nd of July. Can you confirm that? I didn't hear you. Excuse me.
Yes. I believe it was the 1st. I haven't got my diary with me, but both of those days I visited areas around the site and I did hear audible noise on several occasions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, I'm not suggesting that audible noise is necessarily a problem, but I'm just saying that although the company's consultant said that noise was not audible, on some occasions it is. It depends very much on background noise and wind direction in some cases.
Next question is from Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Davis.
Good morning.
Councillor Davis. My question is surrounding liaison committees, or not, as it were. Has any attempt in recent weeks been made either by yourselves or the applicant to establish a liaison committee?
The possibility of doing that has been mentioned to me by Mr. Palmer, who is representing the company. No other progress or representation has been made.
Thank you.
So the suggestion has been made, Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Davis, did I hear you correctly saying that on the whole you feel that the noise issues have been addressed?
I think on the whole is the point. I'm still slightly worried about whether the proposed conditions, even as now revised, are sufficiently tight and robust. But as I say, I'm in a difficult position because although I can claim to know something about these things, I'm not in the loop. All I can do is to make comments which I hope are constructive. And it's been a bit late to make any comments, certainly on the revised conditions, which only appeared yesterday. So on the whole, satisfied. I would like to see some wording in the conditions tightened. I think Councillor Adams-King may refer to one or two of these points that he's also picked up.
Councillor McAvoy, I appreciate that the updated conditions were only finalised yesterday. They were as a result of extensive conversations between the officers, the applicant, and indeed the Environmental Health Officer of Test Valley Borough Council. And ultimately yesterday, the Environmental Health Officer of Test Valley Borough Council approved those amended conditions. So that's where we are on that. I do appreciate we only had them yesterday, and we might, I hope members have had a chance to look at them. They believe they are as tight as possible. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Davis, thank you for the deputation. I note that in the report it says the 40 dB limit would be complied with at the properties closer to the wash plant than the Casbrook Field and Cranbrook Farm locations, 40 dBs. As I look at the chart I have in front of me, 40 dBs is the equivalent of being in a quiet library. Therefore, if that 40 dB limit is achieved, would that be acceptable?
If the limit as quoted is achieved at all properties, that would certainly be acceptable.
Right.
Can I just say that a condition is one thing, but having it complied with and if necessarily being enforced is perhaps another matter.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a supplementary question, if I may, in response to what Councillor Davis has just said. If you hear a noise of above 40 dBs, bearing in mind how low that is, how can you be certain it's coming from that particular location?
Well,
bearing in mind there are other similar locations quite close to it.
Yeah, that's a particular difficulty in monitoring noise from this site because there are other sources of noise nearby, but that is a matter of designing a protocol which ensures that what you are measuring is noise from that particular site. It can be done, not straightforward, Councillor.
I think we've gone as far as we can on this one. Does anyone have any further questions of...
Yes, sorry. Probably it's not really a question. It's just a point of order, really. I just haven't seen the new conditions, and my computer's not working at the moment. So I didn't know there was an update from yesterday. So I just wondered if that can be addressed. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see there's a paper copy. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions of Councillor Bob Davis? In that event, thank you for coming. You're welcome to stay. Your participation is now at an end.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman, very much for inviting me to speak this morning. And it was a delight to meet so many of the colleagues here on site last week. My name is Honorary Alderman Michael Woodall, and I was first elected to the County Council in 1993 to represent what is now known as the Test Valley Central Division. And this covers about 130 square miles, and in this territory we are enriched with a massive amount of sand and gravel deposits. This enables the county to fulfill their obligations to the construction industry. But in November 1993, one Sunday evening, I had a phone call from our former colleague, Councillor Liz Barron, Chairman of the Public Protection Committee, saying, Michael, can you be available next Friday to go to Copenhagen? I said, sure. So a cross-party delegation went to Copenhagen to see what we were not seeing in Hampshire, and that is state-of-the-art incinerators, biodigestion, and also the segregation of household waste in people's households. And about this time, the government directed local authorities to make arrangements for dealing with household rubbish, which is as a historic means of waste disposal, such as landfill, were becoming exhausted, familiar to us all. Again, the Environment Protection Act of 1990 had led the way to vast changes being made to alter the way that waste services were regulated and delivered throughout the county, and indeed the country. EU directives also were introduced at the same time, and the Landfill Tax, which we're familiar with, was also brought into operation and is still existing. It's dealing with household waste in particular, and they were inspected and addressed the issue. As a result of this legislation, our forward-looking council entered into partnership with district and city councils, serving a population of 1.5 million people. And Project Integra was born at that time. Meanwhile, we had to close down our operating incinerators and embark on a massive investment program with Onyx, the French company. Under the terms of the contract, they were funded by them, and new plants were in fact constructed, only 3 of them in the county, serving Basingstoke, Southampton and Portsmouth, and they are still very successfully operating. But with thanks to our scientists, we were able to overcome the concerns of dioxin emissions, and new state-of-the-art energy from waste plants were in fact commissioned later in that decade. Again, bottle banks and composting facilities were introduced into every community across the county, familiar to us all.
Michael, sorry to interrupt you, but this is an application relating to the wash plant.
Yes.
And could we address that issue?
I'm leading into that straight away, Chairman. Thank you very much again. But, but at that time, we're also required to address the larger issue of inner waste, running at several million tonnes per annum. And the very vibrant construction industry and demolition industry throughout the county were having to deal with that issue, and still are. And recycling companies such as the applicant today, Waltech Limited, have invested millions of pounds into new technologies, including new plant, which is the subject of today's debate, vehicles and land availability, but as important, the employment of labour to carry out the work that is necessary. The wash plant that we have now, and you have inspected last week, is testimony to British enterprise, which enables soils and aggregates to be further sifted, allowing the processes and the products that can be introduced into the Hampshire economy. Members, by supporting this excellent application today, it will continue to make it possible for our county to be leaders in fulfilling its statutory obligations and government targets in the treatment of waste in all its formats. Thank you, Chairman, for listening to me.
Good morning, everybody. Again, back for Bunny Lane, the sequel, as the chairman calls it. My name is John Palmer. I'm the planning agent, as you know, acting on behalf of Waltep. You will recall I was in attendance at the members' site visit earlier this month to answer any questions anyone had on the day with respect to this planning application. Members will also recall receiving a brochure on the day, which I hope they've read, which summarises the current situation the applicant finds themselves in. In summary, there are shortages in cement in the county. There are shortages on primary aggregates, especially in winter months. There are shortages of 10mm shingle, 20mm shingle and soft sand. And now there is a severe lack of void space in the county for dealing with this element of CDE waste. In terms of the application before you, SLR and the applicant have worked diligently with your planning officers, Sam, not here, Lisa and Tim, during the determination period of this application. The potential environmental impacts associated with running the plant for a trial 1-year period have been carefully assessed, and where necessary, mitigation has been proposed and encapsulated within the updated condition set. These conditions have been meticulously discussed and the wording subsequently agreed with the EHO officer. Also, I'd like to point out the Environment Agency are in support of the scheme. The Highways officer has had no objections or concerns, and I feel from the initial presentation you can get a sense that the Development Control team are very comfortable with this application. However, it should also be duly noted that the members did not have, as the chairman pointed out, the benefit of a site visit previously when this application was considered back in December. So focusing on the key points which Bob went over, first I'll begin with landscape. The reconfigured and robust landscape proposals have been designed to reduce any potential visual impact associated with the wash plant. It's worth pointing out that on the landscape plan, if you zoom in, there's a commitment to 320 plants, new plants on the new Western Bund. Members will appreciate that the site benefits from a degree of inherent visual mitigation, which is provided by the existing bund and established planting. These landscape proposals have evolved from their original form following feedback from the landscape officer and discussions which have had during the consultation process. And you will also note the landscape officer is not objecting to the proposal. With respect to noise, whilst not a reason for refusal last time around, SLR has submitted a detailed noise assessment for the wash plant in May 2021, which included both an assessment of measured noise levels at the noise-sensitive receptors and a subsequent noise modelling exercise was undertaken. The result of the assessment determined that the rating levels from the wash plant were below limits contained in the relevant planning condition for the site. Members would appreciate the noise climate is very complicated. In particular, I'd like to make the following points on that. Exceedances can come from a range of other sources in the area. Measured levels when wash plant are operating were above limits contained in Condition 8 of 40 dB. However, this was because other sources in the area, not associated with the wash plant, i.e. road traffic, birds singing and other industrial sources, were present at the time of the assessment, which were taking it over the 40 dB. So in summary, the pertinent policies of the Hampshire Minerals Waste Plan and the Test Valley Borough Local Plan have been fully considered, and the development proposals are on balance acceptable in principle. The ability to produce recycled and secondary aggregate at a much quicker rate than has happened to date would allow the site to continue to contribute to Hampshire's aggregate demand in a sustainable manner while significantly reducing stockpiles of unprocessed waste back to 4 metres in height to align with extant condition 11 of the permission. It would allow for the maximisation of the use on-site of CDE wastes. The survival of this local Hampshire business, which employs over 140 people, would be under serious threat if this application was refused today, and a number of jobs and livelihoods would be placed in jeopardy. A significant amount of time and effort has gone into this plan application, by a number of people, and I therefore respectfully and indeed passionately urge members to support the officer's recommendation for approval and vote in favour of this Section 73 planning application. Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Oh, I've just got one question.
Yep.
You've heard about liaison panels. It was mentioned by Councillor Cooper.
Yes.
He put that question to the previous deputy. What would you say about liaison panels, and there isn't one now?
It was covered in my speech, although I was limited on time. I forgive members for that. I've offered to Bob to set up a liaison panel with him, more than happy. I do many in Hampshire along other companies, for example, TJ's, people like that. So yes, more than happy to set up a liaison panel with Bob. He's even linked in on me, so we have a report struck up already on that front.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard previously that there had been a distinct lack of liaison panels at this particular site. Is there any reason for that?
I don't have a specific reason for that. I wasn't aware of it until, this application really came in and I took control of it back in sort of October time. So, but now I'm sort of a new face in the area, if you like. I'd be more than happy to sit on it and be a sort of a link, if you like, between the parish, the locals and the company itself. So more than happy to do that as stated. But as for the history of why there hasn't been one to date, I guess the previous permission was back in 2012 and I guess there wasn't a requirement for it back then. So I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps Lisa or Tim may be able to fill in the blanks on that following
Okay, thank you. But we have your commitment that
yes, absolutely.
You will move towards establishing a liaison panel.
Absolutely, Bob. Yep.
Thank you, Chairman. I have one question, if I may. We've heard about the visual impact of the wash plant on the surrounding area. Has any assessment been done as to where it's actually visible from? Because I get the impression it's from the south to the west and nowhere else. Would that be correct, or is it greater expanse than that?
It's a good question, Councillor Hughes. I mean, the conclusion of our LVA, which we undertaken, was that it wasn't going to be a visual impact with the existing mitigation, which is already there from the previous permission. So we've gone above and beyond and improved and enhanced the existing mitigation on the western boundary there. So in terms of where the impact is, I assume it's from the viewpoints which were appeared in Tim's presentation, because they're the key ones from where you can see it if you're standing on a public footpath, for example. So it would be further to the west. In terms of where the issue is, that's better. I need a pointer. So yeah, I mean, if you go back to the original site layout plan, Tim, it'd be quite useful. The key issue is the gap in the bund, if you like, where the highest point is on the wash plant, where the conveyor belt is. So you recall there will be a retaining wall feature there, and that would enable the applicant to build a higher bund and then to plant on top. So it's a consistent line across the landscape. That currently doesn't exist. It currently sort of goes like that, dips down, you can see the conveyor along the A3057 looking up at it. But the idea being that the retaining wall and the landscape bund will have a consistent all the way across feel to it. So I think it's significantly improved since last time around. So.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Palmer, we're being asked to consider the application for, and it says, to quote the report, only 1 year.
Correct.
The 320 plants that have been put in for the screening of the wash plant, and the photographs we've been shown there. In your opinion, and if you could just give your view on this as for everybody, in that 12-month period, what sort of impact would you imagine that the planting that has taken place thus far would actually have over that 12-month period?
I think a point to mention in that is that they've already started the planting back in January, February at their own risk, where a significant proportion, I'm not entirely sure what percentage of the planting is, probably perhaps 40 up to 50% has already been put in place and where it could be put in place. and the other percentage would be taking place in the next planting season. So by the time sort of November, December time comes, if they buy it fully planted already, like they have done already from the nursery, then it would have a fantastic impact on the surrounding. You would not basically be able to see it shown in the visualizations. You can literally see a tiny piece of the plant, which is the conveyor belt. Is that good enough?
Thank you, Chairman. I draw your attention to condition 10, the revised condition 10, where it states that no more than one campaign activity shall take place on the site at the same time. Mm-hmm. Bearing in mind the record of your client over the last months, including the installation of the plant against refusal and the 10-metre high piles, when it should be 4 metres high, how can you guarantee that the noise patterns can be adhered to based on condition 10? In other words, how can you give an undertaking that your client will only run one campaign activity at a time in order to keep that noise level down to below 40 decibels?
Yeah, I think that the devil's in the detail of the update conditions, which commit to the monitoring of the site going forward. Right,
so you undertake that will take place?
Yes.
There will be only one campaign at a time?
Yes, correct. As per condition 10, it only allows for one campaign activity. The whole idea of the application is to have the wash plant running. When needed, the crusher would go on and the wash plant would go off.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I may be wrong on this. As I understand it, the amended condition is that there is only one, either the wash plant or the cement mixer. Only one of those can operate at the same time. Only one can operate, but in addition, of course, the MRF can operate at the same time because it already can. So there are two which could operate to contribute to the maximum of 40 decibels, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right, okay. Any more questions of this deputy? Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr Palmer, I'm sort of following on from Councillor Philpott's comments about planting. Sorry, hiding here. Condition 3 says that the bunding needs to be completed within 2 months of any permission being granted. Mm-hmm. I'm looking particularly at the enhanced height of the bunding around the wash plant. Mm. So the next growing season, planting 2 months on, we're July now, so if this was to happen very quickly, we're into September, October. Mm-hmm. Your 12 months will run out a year from now, if granted. How high are the plants that you're going to grow? Because it seems to me that they're going to have little or no effect by the time we're 2/3 the way into the 12-month trial. Mm. Or are you intending planting on top of the enhanced bunding sizable plants that will offer immediate screening?
Yeah, that's what they've done to date, Councillor. They've brought stock already planted and put them on the bund already. In terms of the new area, the retaining wall, I think, will be in shortly, and that will allow the bund to go up, and they already have seed on site to allow for the planting, which they've already brought to be put onto that area. So it will happen, very quickly. You will see a difference. And then obviously the planting season for any additional species which are required to fill in the gaps can take place later on in the year to complete the picture completely. I think the key point as well, picking up on that, is the fact that the bund offers that additional noise mitigation which is needed, that sort of 4 metre screening in that gap as well, from the receptor further north of the site. So that's important as well on that. It's okay.
Any further questions of this deputy? Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And good morning, colleagues, and thank you for letting me address you this morning. Thank you, too, to all of you who attended the viewing panel last week, which, as the Chairman has said, I think helped all of us better understand the issues affecting this application. I'm the new member for Romsey Rural, the county division within which this application site sits, but I'm also a Test Valley Borough Councillor for the area as well. The application is contentious locally, not least because of the site and its location in such a prominent spot above the village of Timsbury. Also, though, because the applicant installed the wash plant without permission, or indeed any notification. I should firstly recognise the hard work of Lisa and Tim in liaising with Test Valley's environmental health team in the last few days over their concerns about noise from the site. I thank them for that and the revised conditions 7 and 8 in your update paper, which address many of the noise concerns locally. There are two issues in respect of noise raised by Test Valley's EHO, which I think may be covered by the conditions, but I perhaps could ask for clarification from the officers that they are. The first is that the applicable noise limit at each receptor position should be taken to include all site noise combined, not wash plant noise alone. Otherwise, this would effectively allow an increase of site noise up to 3 decibels and would potentially result in difficulties enforcing the limit. The second is there should be provision in the conditions that, in the event of the planning authority receiving complaints and suspecting the applicable noise limits to be breached, then the operator should, at their own expense, undertake noise monitoring exercise to be undertaken by a suitably qualified acoustician and in accordance with the procedure to be agreed with the WPA and submit a report of their findings to the planning authority within a specified timescale. If they are not, can I please impress upon you the need for both and ask that the conditions are strengthened to include these provisions? I welcome the suggestion that a liaison panel should be established. I think that will go a long way to helping with the relations between the site and the local population. Turning to the issue of landscape, I will not repeat the points Councillor Davis has made in his comments on behalf of the Parish Council, save to say that I absolutely agree with them. Those of you who visited the site last week saw our area at its very best, green and verdant. However, the situation sustains for only 4 months of the year. Please consider that the lovely view over the valley of the River Test, upon which many of you commented when we were standing on the existing bund, means the site is equally visible in reverse. Much more so outside of the summer growing season. The plant will still extend some 5 metres above the proposed bunding. For much of the year, it will be visible from some distance. Councillor Davis is correct. The application is directly at odds with the 2012 appeal decision and the inspector's requirement that no machinery will be visible above the perimeter bunds. The most challenging aspect of this application is its proposed timescale. The application proposes permission for just 12 months to allow for the processing of the waste stored on site, the mounds of which already greatly exceed the existing permission for their size and are visible from a number of vantage points around the area. You can only take into account the proposal that the plant will operate for 12 months. If that were the case, then I think there would be less concern over some of the landscape and noise issues being raised. However, those of you who have visited the site will have seen the scale of the plant. The applicants themselves have made reference in their documentation to ongoing annual monitoring of the impact of the site. Their proposed mitigation for the landscape impact is substantial and expensive. Not least, the plant itself represents an investment of millions of pounds. When I asked the applicants' representatives what happens to the plant after the stockpiles of waste have been processed, their answer was somewhat ambiguous last week. I would contend that this application for 12 months' use is, in my opinion, disingenuous. It's a Trojan horse. This plant is going nowhere. You will have an application for permanent stationing of the plant before you within a year of its operation commencing. I don't doubt that the plant and the aggregates it recycles are needed. However, I feel we should consider the application for what it is, one for the stationing of the plant in this location for the first 12 months of a much longer, potentially permanent operation. For that reason, I would urge you to consider whether the proposals before you provide sufficient control and mitigation for such a large plant in a prominent location on the lip of this ridge. A location where noise carries across the valley, where the topography can extend the noise over a large area. A location where it is visible not only from the valley below, but from the sites across the valley floor, the ridge opposite, and from neighbouring parishes. Colleagues, I spent some time last week watching your deliberations over this application in December and the concerns which brought you to refuse it then. I'd ask you what has changed. I'd contend not much. Consequently, I would ask you to refuse this application once again for the very good landscape reasons raised by Councillor Davis. Please require the applicant to come back once more with an application which provides proper mitigation commensurate with the 2012 appeal decision and which provides protection for the surrounding community from what I believe the applicant intends this to be, a long-term location for this plant. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for considering my dispensation. Yeah, thank you.
So, sorry, I was just reading something, Tim, that has just passed to me. That was in relation to the 40 decibels covering all our activities on the site, wasn't it? I can confirm it does, yep. Yes. And that has been agreed with the Environmental Health Officer.
And the second one was, actually, let me give you, so I used the wording from the EHO, so it's the last paragraph on that page, which is about the ongoing measurement and so on.
Yeah. So members will see that there's been some amendments to the condition in relation to this compliance monitoring report and the compliance strategy. The issue of noise monitoring, how that will be done, will be addressed through this revised compliance monitoring report that will be submitted to us, and the Environmental Health Officer will be involved in the discharge of that scheme. So we and the Environmental Health Officers are content that new requirement on the compliance strategy covers those issues that you've mentioned.
That's super. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll wait for questions.
Member have any questions of the Councillor? Councillor Cooper.
Councillor Adams-King, it does seem to me, therefore, the outstanding objection is the visual intrusion. That seems to be the thing that's not been resolved by all these additional conditions.
It is, yes.
If there was a way of placing the plant in such a location as it wasn't visually intrusive, i.e. it was trenched so that actually the top of it appeared below the bund, or didn't appear as the case may be, would that satisfy both yourself and the local community?
I believe so, Councillor Cooper, yes. You are far better versed in the topography of the area than I am with your experience, but yes, I think so, because as you will know, the site is visible from quite a long way away, not just from the valley floor. I, as you know, live on the other side of the valley, and there are a number of footpaths from there that look straight across at it.
Right. Do we have any further questions of the councillor? Right. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Adam Kings, you and Councillor Davis mentioned the nature of the hedges and trees not giving adequate cover through the whole of the year. Did the Test Valley Borough Council Environmental Officer look at the planting plan?
I'm sorry, I couldn't tell you that, Councillor Conchal, I don't know. They have been most concerned with the noise aspect. In terms of visual impact, I would assume that it would be more an issue for our landscape officers in Test Valley than the EHO per se.
Maybe, Chairman, it may come up for the officers to comment on later on if they have more information.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much.
I think that then deals with all the questions of the deputies. And members, do you now have any questions of our officers in relation to their presentation? Councillor Jackman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully a simple one, because I've got a slight problem looking in the agenda. I can't actually look at one of the diagrams in there, which is the planting scheme. So BL LSC 01.2. It's just showing up as a corrupt image within the agenda pack. So I was wondering if we can have a look at that one, because the biggest question seems to be around the actual planting scheme that's going to be put in. I think in the document pack it's the next image from that one. because that one seems to be .1, I think, in my reading anyway. Because the question mark is really around the planting scheme that's being put in and whether the planting on the revised bund is going to be adequate. And I just wanted to understand a bit more about what was being planted on the top there and whether it was suitable or not. And I seem to have missed as well how well that's going to be cared for. I know with most planning applications it's put in there as a strict condition. They've got to maintain it for a certain period of time, but I may well have missed that, but I haven't seen that in the agenda pack at all.
So in terms of the detail, what we're trying to do is get it up behind the scenes, because we're going to have to go into a separate system to get that plan up if it is corrupted. And so we'll find that detail for you, maybe come back to that specific question in a moment if that's okay. But obviously there will be a requirement for the site to replace any landscaping that fails. And when we went on site the other day, Councillor Cooper mentioned that he was seeing some species that hadn't successfully established, and so we would expect the applicant to address that going forward, and certainly that would be an issue that Tim would be looking at as the enforcement officer for the site to make sure that that is in compliance. What I will say in terms of the landscape side of the things is that the landscape officer from the County Council has been involved in the revisions to this application. There were discussions prior to the submission of this application, and her comments have been taken into account in the application that's come before you. The other thing to note is the response that she has made to the application, where she is now content with the landscaping scheme on the basis of the 12-month application that we have before us. Now, I take the points that have been made about what visual changes will potentially happen this year with this planting scheme, but obviously we have a duty to try and do something about screening on site. And as John alluded to, the applicant alluded to, some pre-planting has already taken place way in advance of you considering this application. So we are a little bit ahead of where we would potentially have been today with regards to some screening. But I do take the point that 12 months isn't a great deal of time to bring that up. Having said that, the landscape architect is content with the scheme that is before you. So that's where we're at with that one.
Just going on applications I've worked on for Rushmore Borough Council. When things have been very contentious, the planting scheme has been it's been enforced as quite a range going in the first place. So you're looking at putting in a mixture of some more mature plants than ordinarily, because I know in most planting schemes for a new development, it would go in as quite small hedging plants, which are sort of only a couple of feet tall, and we would be looking at sort of 10 to 12 years before they'd reach maturity. So as long as there's a mix, I'll be happy on that one.
I can confirm there is. The landscape architect was advising the applicant on the initial discussions about the type of species they were expecting to be on site to give as greater screening as possible. So that has factored into the proposal you have before you today.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions, if I may. One's a fairly obvious one, I guess, and it's just want to get some clarification for us as members, just to make it clear. The revised conditions say that the noise emitted shall not exceed 40 decibels. So the question then would be, what happens if it does? What sanctions, what action would we take should it do so? The second one is to a great extent, Councillor Jackman's stolen this point, but I just wanted a clarification, because we've seen these photographs and artists' impressions displaying what the site looks like now and what it's envisaged to look like at some stage in the future. What I wanted to find out from yourselves really is how reliable and how robust are those artists' impressions that we've seen in terms of what will actually happen in the future, and what is the situation should we say have to return to this matter in some time in the future and find that in fact that the screening did not offer the kind of screening to the site that was displayed to us today, and we were led to believe that would occur. So I know those are probably quite difficult questions to answer, but I'm just interested to know. Thanks.
So I'll start off, and Tim may want to come in a bit in terms of the enforcement side of things. As I've already mentioned in my response to Councillor Adams-King, this compliance strategy that is referenced in your new conditions will cover the monitoring and enforcement of the noise issues. So we are comfortable, and so is the Environmental Health Officer, that the inclusion of this revision to that strategy, and indeed the matters addressed in the condition, once they are addressed, we are comfortable that that matter is essentially addressed and is sorted, and we've got enforceability on this issue. The key point here is obviously noise is you know, as we know, one of the main issues with regards to this application, and it will be down to Tim and his team, Tim as an enforcement officer alongside the Environmental Health Officer, to ensure that this is this application and this site is in compliance with the noise matters that are set out in those conditions. So that's kind of the first point. The second point about the visuals, obviously it's part of the application pack. The landscape architect has reviewed and considered those visuals and is content with what has been presented before them. The key thing is obviously, as I've already mentioned, is about this 12-month issue, and obviously we will monitor the application of that landscaping scheme throughout the life of the development. We can only consider what was before us at the moment. If we're in a situation that a further application comes forward, the landscaping issue will be addressed then, but that's not for consideration today. So I can give you hopefully some assurance that officers will be actively monitoring, and I can assure you Tim spends a significant amount of time out at Bunny Lane making sure there is compliance on those conditions, and I've got confidence in the conditions that are before you, both on landscaping and noise, as they stand, based on the fact this is a temporary consent. Tim, I don't know whether you want to add anything on that.
Yes, so just on the noise condition, so the condition 8 that has been added in conjunction with discussions with the EHO, the Environmental Health Officer, that provides an early opportunity. Once the bunds and the concrete retaining wall has been constructed, it provides a very early opportunity to check that 40 decibel limit is being achieved. So that's before we even start receiving, or hopefully don't receive, any complaints in the future regarding that limit. So there is an initial check, and that has within it a requirement to look at any additional mitigation they could perform to the plant, probably the actual operation of the plant. You'll have seen there was some additional screening that was added around the generator. It's that sort of thing that could be explored to try and bring any noises from the site into the limit of 40 decibels. And then obviously that compliance strategy is already something that exists. And so we're happy that that's something that we can follow up and enforce. And so this update is essentially adding the new receptor location and then firming up some of the compliance requirements in there.
Sorry, Joe, I'm going to just come back just for one more thing. Sorry, Tim. Can I just clarify then? Mitigation, yes. What about sanction?
Well, sanction is just like any of our enforcement powers. It's something we can certainly follow up on. We always look to try and bring an operator into compliance voluntarily before we start looking at some of those harder tools that we have at our disposal. But certainly that's something that could be pursued if it got to that stage.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 points I just want to raise and get some advice on, please. The first one is following on from what we've just been talking about. Looking at the planting schedule, the top of that screen that members will have seen, it's in microscopic print, but it appears to me that most of this is deciduous. And given the sensitivity of this, should we be having more evergreen species on the site to provide year-round screening rather than just in the summer, is the first question. And the second question is, we say that under the amended condition, that prior to the operation of the plant, the bunds and retaining wall shall be constructed. Is there any merit in changing constructed to completed? because I'm slightly concerned that they'll be sort of shoveling dirt halfway up the bund whilst they're operating the plant, is the second thing. And the final thing is we keep being told this is a temporary 12-month consent we're being asked to approve. Should we not therefore have a condition in there somewhere saying that on completion of the 12 months of operation, the plant shall be decommissioned and dismantled and removed?
Thank you very much. I'll start initial response on that. As I've already mentioned, the species was subject to quite a lot of discussions with the landscape architect, and there were discussions about the types and the different types of species, and indeed the screening that those would provide. What we have before us meets the landscape architect's requirements, and some of that comes into it takes into account the ecological aspects of the landscaping that would be put on site as well. So all I can say to you is essentially the landscape architect is content with the screening that has proposed. But I note your points about the some of the species, but that has been discussed, and we are where we are in terms of what has been proposed, and the landscape architect being content with that. Her views have been taken into account in the species mix essentially. In terms of prior to the operation of the plant, you will note that we have included this additional mechanism to ensure those noise mitigation measures are in place before the full-blown operation of the plant. We'll have a quick look at that condition and just see if there is potential just to tweak a few words to make that a little clearer, taking on board your comments, and we can discuss that with Councillor Latham in the event that permission is granted here. And the final point in terms of the 12-month decommissioning and in terms of essentially the restoration, I guess, of that part of the site if the plant were to be, I think that is a valid point, and I think that essentially is something we can add to the decision notice. But we have a standard condition we can add in terms of decommissioning after the end of the life of the site.
One is Councillor Cooper, I think.
Yes, Chairman, can I just endorse that last point, which is well made. We need to make sure that all of these things have an end date, and when the end date comes, then we have removal as one of our conditions. We do it elsewhere. My question relates to the vegetation. I understand the landscape officer is happy, but when you look at the text of the report, I think you'll find that the bunds are being constructed from material already on site. And by definition, that material is going to be sort of fairly poor quality. And I just wonder whether we're going to get the vegetation screen that we need and deserve when you're putting a bund on top of a hilltop, which is going to be very badly or very, very well drained, therefore very dry, and therefore very, very hard to establish vegetation on it when it's coming from the actual plant itself. So that worries me a lot, Chairman. And my second question is one I'd like an answer to, because that one can't be answered at all, and that is dust. When we were on site, one of the things that I found very distinctive was the amount of mud there was all over the place. And I know there are wheel washing conditions, which is one of my bugbears as well. They're here. But the point is that this site does dry out quite quickly. And as soon as it dries out, there's dust everywhere. In fact, when we were there, the ground was damp, but the surface was dry, and the vehicles that were manoeuvring on site, and there were very few of them because we were there, were generating a lot of dust, which was then drifting across the countryside. And one of the objections of the locals is the amount of transient dust in the area. Are there any dust suppression conditions that we can add would be appropriate to this particular site, please?
Lovely. I'll start on that first point about your worries about the construction of those bunds and the establishment. Obviously, that will be something that we will look at through the enforcement of those conditions, and that will be something we will actively be looking at, because I take the views of yourselves and the other members, and indeed the parish council and Councillor Adams King, that this is important to this proposal. So we will ensure that is established appropriately, and we'll take any measures needed to make sure that happens. happens. So that's the first point. In relation to the dust, and Tim may want to comment a little bit in relation to the monitoring of the site. There is existing schemes already in place for dust mitigation on site. I take your point quite, in terms of how that site dries out. It also gets exceptionally wet, which we know from visits earlier this year. But it is something that is actively already monitored by Tim. And also on top of that, the environmental health officers and the environmental permit cover dust in more significant depth. So there are those mechanisms to make sure that that's in place, and we will be very conscious of that as an issue going forward in the event this is granted planning permission, because we're adding an additional activity potentially to the site. So enforceability of conditions, permits, and the EHO will also have some involvement here. And I think, we've never had any recent complaints in relation to dust off-site, but if there are issues, we will address them accordingly.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions about the noise-sensitive receptors, if I may. Can you just explain how they work and where they're going to be located?
I'll probably divert to Tim in relation to this, because he's done quite a lot of work on the receptors with the environmental health officer in the last week or so.
So yes, the applicant submitted a noise assessment with 6 noise-sensitive receptors that they chose in their professional judgment. 2 of those include the ones that were already existing in the current appeal decision that operates on the site. So essentially, they're residential locations. The location at Hilltop on Heron Lane wasn't chosen or wasn't included as a noise-sensitive receptor of concern during the appeal decision. Obviously, that has now been added, partly because the wash plant is located there, and it has almost direct sight of the elevated portion of the wash plant. In discussions with the environmental health officer, all 6 of those locations haven't been taken forward as monitoring sites for the purposes of the conditions. They believe that 3 of them would actually be subject to too much background noise from the road for them to be worthwhile, and the ones of real concern were the 3 that have been identified. And actually, during the appeal decision, there was quite a lot of discussion about the locations that would be worst impacted by the expansion of the site at that time.
Thank you for that explanation. Can I also confirm that the noise monitors are orientated directly towards the site?
So the monitoring that would be done, these aren't real-time monitors that would be located. Instead, it's a person going out with their equipment and undertaking field assessments. Obviously, they'll be looking for the correct weather conditions and choosing days appropriately to do that. So, these are professional acoustic experts who will be undertaking these measurements.
Thank you.
And there's Councillor Taylor, I think, and then I think we've finished.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I might just ask for some information about the materials that the bunds will be constructed of. It's sort of suggestive in the agenda pack that it will probably be inert materials and things that can't actually be recycled. My sense of that is that those would be things that would normally go off to landfill and be treated with a certain amount of care and concern to ensure that minerals and things like that weren't getting into the landscape or the water table or any of those sorts of things. Can we be certain that that kind of care is going to be taken and that there won't be an impact on water table, all those sorts of things by using these kinds of materials in this way, which strikes me as being a bit of concern, really?
I mean, the new bunding will be created from the construction and demolition materials that are already on site, and essentially those will be, used to construct the bunds, and will be treated in a way that accordingly that shouldn't have an impact on the environment. The environmental permit is very important here, which is managed by the Environment Agency, and you mentioned with regards to potential impact on the water environment. The Environment Agency's permit will specifically control any issues of water issues in association with the site. We don't have any particular concerns about the use of the construction and demolition material on site because of the nature of the material that we know is on there, and we would expect the Environment Agency to basically regulate that on top of any discussions that we would have. So I think we're content with the use of that material. It's quite common for construction and demolition material of this nature to be used in bunding across a number of different sites. It happens quite regularly. The key point is to make sure that is true construction and demolition material that will have no potential impact on the environment. So I think it's covered.
Thank you.
I think we have now dealt with all questions of the deputies and the members and the officers. So we now go into debate on this item as to whether or not we are prepared to approve the application, which is a repeat of the application from December, which is to amend conditions 2, 9 and 10, I think, to enable the wash plant to be installed for a period of 12 months from presumably today. So that is what we are debating, and nothing else is effectively relevant. We need to take into account the reasons for we need to consider the reasons for refusal from last year, which I have already identified, and you have to consider whether or not the new conditions which have been put forward and are set out in detail in the amended report satisfy those concerns in relation to noise and visual landscape. You know that the Environmental Health Officer of the District Council now approves that condition in relation to noise, and the Hampshire Landscape Officer has not expressed any concerns about landscape. So that's basically what we are looking at in terms of discussion on the merits of this application. So who wants to kick off? Councillor Ford.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, of course I wasn't here in December, so didn't have the benefit of seeing the application then. But I have to echo your own comments at the beginning of the meeting, and that of the value of the visit. It really, from my point of view, put everything into perspective. It's very difficult reading a report for something like this when we're looking at visual impact over a substantial area and noise and such as that, and to get a sense of the height and the bulk of the wash plant. So that was very, very good. It obviously comes down to visual impact and noise impact, and I'm encouraged to hear, as you've just mentioned, that the Environmental Health Officer now is satisfied with the strengthening of the noise conditions, and even those who had objections that we heard from earlier seem to be satisfied with this condition so long as it works. And of course we always say that with any conditions, so long as they work. The visual impact, I guess, is the one that would concern us, and we have spoken, many members have spoken today about the planting and the effectiveness of the planting, and we can but see with that. Again, the objectors did mention that the bund is going to be 4 metres high. This is 9 metres, so 5 metres will be visible. It won't, of course, if the planting works, because the planting will eat into that 5 metres. I was encouraged again to hear that they are going to be plants that have been planted earlier and have some maturity with them that are going to be replanted. There is, of course, a risk in replanting, and that is the longevity of the plant, but we assume that works, and there are processes in place that the applicant has to replace those. So I'm certainly encouraged. I think we have to accept the noise issues. We've heard about receptors and the EHO approval now, and I'm certainly a lot more encouraged by what I've heard about the visual. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I concur with the views expressed by Councillor Ford relating to noise, and I think we all noted that Councillor Davis in his deputation said that to a great extent his concerns and the concerns of residents regarding noise had been addressed, and I think that's important. The issue really then is one of landscape and the impact on the landscape, so far as I can tell. Policy 13 refers to, quote, unacceptable adverse visual impact. So, and I would suggest, Chairman, that very few minerals and waste development activities would have no impact. So under those circumstances, we then have to judge whether the adverse impact is acceptable or unacceptable. And our policy is that it has to be unacceptable. Now, given that the discussions have subsequently taken place over the last 6 months, since the last meeting when we discussed this in December, with the developer and with the applicant, and the applicant has come forward with substantial and significant mitigation offers, and that those have been described in some detail with photographs and artists' impressions and the like here. I would say from my perspective that an applicant has to be allowed to offer those mitigations in order for us to be able to judge them in whether we would consider them to be the visual impact to be acceptable or unacceptable. I think there's an element of trust here too. We have to be trusting, I think, that the landscape officer and that the officers who have had these discussions with the applicant have come to the conclusion that the impacts would, if they are adverse impacts, would be acceptable. And I think under those circumstances, Chairman, I'm happy now to support the recommendations with the revised conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In December, when this application was last at this committee, I was left with the impression that the applicants, to some extent, rode roughshod over the local residents and also over the council. I do feel a little bit different today, I must admit. I'm gratified to see the amended conditions that seemingly do strengthen the acceptance of the application. However, I think the key to this is going to be within the enforcement, and that we do need to be robust in our enforcement over the next 12 months, because I've no doubt in my mind that prior to this application of this permission, should it be granted, expiring, we'll see another application for a more long-term facility. The other thing that does bother me, in the past there's been a little liaison. We have heard today commitments from both parties that there will be liaison panels, and whilst it can't, I accept it can't be put in as a condition, I can only ask that you both parties stick to their word and form a liaison panel.
Thank you, Chairman. I hate these kinds of applications where the applicant comes along and gets refused and then says to us, oh, sod it up, do it anyway, and does just that, which is very irritating. It's even more irritating when we have a presentation this morning from an old county councillor snatching the defeat from the jaws of victory, it seems to me, but there we go. The fact remains that all of the various issues that I have certainly raised in the past have been addressed, as my colleagues have already said. What I will say is that if over the next 12 months any of those conditions are not adhered to or fail, then will be even more sore about this particular site and this particular application, and I think we'll treat it accordingly. So I came here to vote against with a predisposition to do so. I'm going to abstain because I can't really go back on what I've said in the past, but equally I do recognise that a lot of work's been done to mitigate the situation, but by heavens, that mitigation better work.
Thank you, Chairman. It's been said previously, and I'll echo it again, you can't beat site visits. Site visits just open our eyes and give us a perspective that we cannot get from a report. I mean, this site is so visual that I drove past it and missed it. I could not see it from the road. I ended up past the household waste recycling centre to the material waste site further up the road before I actually turned around and went back. We're asked to make a subjective assessment. And I always look at the sustainable development 3 items: economic, environmental and social. We've already been told if this site closes, there's 140 local jobs that have gone. That's a significant impact in that local area. We then look at the environmental cost. We all want less stuff going to landfill. We say that if landfill sites are running out. If we don't do anything with this, that's where it's going to end up. So the opportunity to extract the stuff that is recyclable from this inert waste, which helps our minerals and waste plan, because there is a shortage, you only have to read paragraph 101 in the report, has to be beneficial. It also means that we're not importing it from outside of the county. And it's been estimated that 5,000 tonnes coming from the Mendips generated 40,000 road miles, which cannot be great for the environment. Therefore, having it in the county, usable from within the county, must be beneficial. The fundamental issue is the unacceptable visual impact. And I accept that there are areas from around the site where it is more visual than it is from others. And that's based on a very limited personal experience of when I couldn't see it. And I accept that the amount of mitigation that the applicants have put in place to try and address that has to be commendable and has to be recognised. And I take the point that Councillor Cooper, we can't place a condition on it, but essentially when there's any area of conflict, pick up the phone and have a chat with somebody. See if we find out if that noise that's coming from the site is actually coming from the site. Is it not coming from a lawnmower that's 90 dBs further up the road that you're actually hearing and not the site? There's all sorts of things associated with sound, and I acknowledge that Councillor Davis has an expertise in this. Mine's very limited based on my previous military experience in terms of dBs and attenuation. So recognising it, there'll always be noise. You know, it's got to be as quiet as a library, this site. That's an amazing challenge, and the applicants have said, okay, we'll achieve that. We have to take them on trust, and I take on board what Councillor Cooper said. You know, if it's not working, we have enforcement powers, let's use them. I hate having regulations that are abused and we don't enforce them. That's at a local level and at a county level. There's no point in having the regulations in place if we don't use them. So I am very happy to support this application as this is on the order paper, and I hope my fellow colleagues do likewise. Thank you.
Lisa, did you want to respond to Councillor Rod Cooper's question?
Yeah, I'm happy to, or I can do it at the end once members have finished debating the item, just by some way of summary.
I have a feeling that debating has finished now.
That's absolutely fair. So I was just going to pick up on a couple of points that have been raised by members this morning.
Sorry, there is one. Councillor Macker, I'm so sorry.
You forgot me, Chairman.
I did, sorry.
Well, I really want to concur mostly with what my colleagues have said. I will say how disappointed I was that the applicant just went ahead and did what they wanted without permission. And that straight away puts you back up. And probably, if I'd not gone to the site, I may have been mindful, perhaps, not to support it. But visiting the site does change your perception of what's going on, and I was quite impressed with what I saw. As far as visual intrusion is concerned, as Councillor Hughes said, I did exactly the same. I drove straight past it and didn't even know it was there, and I was queuing up for the waste recycling place, and I thought, I'm sure this can't be right. So I didn't find it too visually intrusive. My biggest concern is noise. I think there is nothing worse than noise intrusion into your life. And I was quite pleased to hear that Councillor Davis had actually said that as far as he could tell, that had been mitigated. And that for me was the most important thing. So I really do hope that the local residents, the parish council and the applicant will get together and form a liaison panel, because I think that is very, very important. As Councillor Hughes said, you need to talk to people, not just report to people, and then you can get problems sorted out. So with the revised conditions, having now been strengthened, I am actually quite content with what I've heard, and I will support this application.
Thank you. Councillor, no, so we now go back to Lisa to comment on Rod Cooper's point.
Thank you. I'll start. I'm just going to do just a few general points, and I'll come to the enforcement and liaison panel part of that in my comments. I've noted, the comments that have been made about the retrospective nature this morning, and as officers, that that was disappointing to us to see that coming onto site, and we understand, how the applicant has conveyed why we are in that situation, but that is not a position that we like to see. As officers, and you'll see documented in the report the actions that have been taken between times in relation to that retrospective nature and what enforcement powers and negotiations we have done. But obviously here, the retrospective nature is not a material consideration. So although it is disappointing, we are here to look at the proposal that is before us today. The noise mitigation measures that we've talked about a lot this morning, we've done a lot of work on this in the last week, and we took into account the matters, particularly that Councillor Adams-King was raising with me on site last week, and indeed the concerns that EHO still had following the initial report being released to you. So the work that has been done has, particularly with regards to what Tim has managed to negotiate with the Environmental Health Officer and the applicant team, strengthens all of this significantly in our view and provides us with much more enforcement on the noise issue. Enforcement of any minerals and waste application is the responsibility of Dave, our lead enforcement officer, and Tim and other members of the team. They will actively monitor this site to ensure compliance with the conditions. And on top of that, you've got the environmental health officer and the environmental permitting team at the Environment Agency, who will also actively monitor the development that's before you today. The new mitigation measures that have been proposed, we've included in a condition to make sure that they're in place before the plant is operational. That's absolutely fundamental, and it was an issue that the Environmental Health Officer in particular wanted to see reflected in the conditions. So we've got that in place as well. I'm not going to talk too much about the need, but the need is very, very clearly documented in your report in terms of aggregate supply. There is a significant issue with aggregate supply in Hampshire and within the region, and actually becoming more of a national issue. And that's something that officers are already discussing nationally, because there is an emerging issue as we come out of this pandemic. So this site will help to contribute to feeding the market for aggregates and the demand that is there. The final point to note is in relation to enforcement and liaison panels, which Councillor Cooper raised. The reason we have put this requirement in for this site is we can see the positive role that liaison panels can play in the local community. We have a site not too far down the road that I know Councillor Mark Cooper is involved in, that has a liaison panel. They do similar types of activities. There are no reasons why this site shouldn't have the same. And my view is that that will help to develop relationships in the local community, particularly between the applicant and the parish council, so they can engage on operational issues going forward. So it's critically important in my view for this site, given what we've had over the last year in terms of applications. And the final point for me to note is about enforceability. As I say, just to reiterate, we will enforce this permission actively. Tim will actively monitor the site, and we will respond accordingly if any enforcement issues come up, and we will use the powers accordingly that we have. So that's just what I'd like to just summarise. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I think now we have concluded debate, so I can now pass over to Kate to take the vote over, or are you happy for me to ask, or if somebody could put the recommendation up, I can... Right, okay. Well, there's item 6. That's the item that we are voting on, and you are being asked to support that application, subject to the conditions as set out in Appendix A, as they are amended in the updated report. So that's in effect what you are voting for or against. So can I take those in favour of supporting this application? Those against? And those abstaining?
3 abstentions.
Thank you for that. So the motion is passed. Grateful to that. I'm now going to have a 5-minute break so that everybody can do whatever they want to do for 5 minutes. And So to item number 7, and that is an amendment and reprofiling of the landfill site final restoration levels at Blue Haze landfill site. Members will know that Blue Haze is the last landfill site in the county. I think I read that there are only 3 landfill sites left in the south of England. We, in our mineral and waste plan, have decided that we would like to get rid of all waste to landfill by 2030, and we are moving towards that. But in the meantime, we do need that landfill site because we cannot at this stage eliminate all waste to landfill. So that site is important. The purpose of this application is to increase 2 areas which are in the course of restoration by another 2 metres. And in doing so, that would enable an extra 770,000 tonnes of waste to be brought into the site. At present levels, that site will run out. If this is not implemented, it will run out in about 2025 or 26. The extra 770,000 tonnes will therefore take us up to 2029 when restoration and infilling finishes. So that covers our period up to 2030. So that's the purpose of the application. I'll ask Kirk Denton now to address us on the full details of the Lisa wants to speak first.
Thank you, Councillor Latham. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the proposal before handing over to Kirk, who's going to take it through the presentation in terms of, as he's the case officer. As Councillor Latham's already said, this is Hampshire's last remaining landfill, and it's looking to maximise the capacity at that existing landfill. Now, you've heard from recent discussions, particularly on the site visit last week, about the application of the waste hierarchy. And of course, landfill does fall at the bottom of the waste hierarchy. However, in relation to this site, it's still an integral part of the waste management requirements and for Hampshire, and it's part of the Project Integra programme that has already been raised earlier this morning. So what we're looking at here is essentially maximising the current site. There'll be no change to the end date for tipping at the site. That will remain the same as what's recently been granted planning permission through the most recent consent issued by the Planning Authority. And what we're looking at is the maximisation and reprofiling of the site to ensure we can tip some additional waste in site in the region of about 700,000 tonnes. It's very clear, and it's set out in your report, about the need for landfill and the short-term need for it. And so I draw your attention to the relevant paragraphs in the report in relation to need, because I think that is very important that members are aware of that issue. The Highway Authority is here today, so Philippa is here today to answer any more detailed questions you may have on the highway aspects of that, because there is a small increase in HGV movements associated with the proposal. And just to make the point that there is already an existing liaison panel in place for this site, so you won't see any particular reference to a need to establish one, because there is one that's been operating for a period of time. And the final point, just to note, before I hand over to Kirk, is that you haven't had a site visit for this site. This is a significant site, but what we have arranged is some drone footage to be prepared for you. So we got a drone up a couple of months ago, and so Kirk's presentation provides you with a significant amount of visuals about the scale of the site and how it sits within the wider environment. So I'll hand over to Kirk as case officer now, and he will take you through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I'm not sure what I need to add to those 2 excellent briefings. Okay, thank you. there's been a couple of updates to the report. They're mainly due to a slight typo on the end date, and the conditions were jigged around slightly, so there's need to be just a slight change, minor change in the numbers, the condition numbers, and that's within the update. Thank you. So the application is for planning consent for a vertical extension at Blue Haze landfill site. The proposed final post-settlement restored profile height will be a maximum of 2 metres higher than the current approved levels. This will result in a capacity increase of approximately 770,000 tonnes of capacity to be created. The extension will be completed and a landfill restored within the current approved timescales. So the application site was previously a sand pit. It's been lined and progressively restored with a careful importation of non-hazardous waste material. So the application site here is edged in red. The site has presently got planning permission to the end of 2029. At the present time, the landfill is expected to reach capacity at the end of 2026, the start of 2027. So the proposal will result in an increased additional capacity, which will allow material to be deposited in line with the timeframes of the current planning permission. The current plan permission requires waste to stop coming to the site by the end of 2029. That is not proposed to be changed. So the current day-to-day running of the site will remain unchanged. It will be just to increase the capacity. So the application site is located approximately 4 kilometres west of the New Forest National Park. It's edged in red. To the west of that red line, you can see the access road. And again, just the red and blue line required for planning purposes, so the blue line showing the full extent of the applicant's ownership of the site. So the landfilling of non-hazardous waste at the site has been undertaken since the grant of planning permission in June 1999, and that allowed the progressive restoration of the sandpit by the importation of non-hazardous waste. So you can clearly see the site there, edged in red, and the surrounding landscape. So you can see on this site, the slide here, the site comprises of 10 landfill cells. Each cell is numbered, and this helps with the organisation and filling of the site. Generally, the perimeter of the site has been landfilled and restored. The cells in the centre of the site are currently being landfilled, and the cells to the north of the centre of the site are used to locate the landfill site operations. So it's to the northwest of the site. There's a waste transfer station, gas plant, and other site buildings and structures such as car parking. So this is the restoration plan, so that the site will be restored in line with the current restoration concept as the existing permitted site and the existing permitted restoration scheme. The fully restored areas will not be disturbed as part of this application. It will be the present active landfill areas which will be increased in height. The site will be restored with a mixture of forestry, predominantly heathland edges, and a wildlife corridor. So we have here the site entrance. This is a Google Street View photo, but it accurately reflects the entrance to the site. You can see deliberately planned slip lane there with the access into the site. We have the eastern part of the site looking west. Over, you can see the cell lining and active areas. The mist you can see is there as part of the odour neutralising sprays, part of their site management. We are here on the eastern part of the site looking west. So if I just scan back to site boundary, that photo is probably taken near where phase 2 is stated on that slide, and it's looking back towards the west where that green line is, which is like the present site access. I hope that helps you get your bearings on the site. You can see the plant in the background, and in the background there you can see a green building. That's a waste transfer station. That's the main site operation areas, car parking, vehicle access. This is the northern part of the site looking south, not the southern part of the site looking northwest. So this is looking south. This is the top part of the site. And this is on the eastern boundary. This is heathland that have been, which wouldn't be affected as part of the infilling. This is looking further west away from the site. Looking east away from the site, sorry. So I've got a video here which shows the misting in operation. So I can get into, see if that works. I'm just in presentation mode, so I need to try and get my laptop to make sense with the screen. And just click on it. Alright, seems to disconnected. Yeah. Splendid. Yeah, I played it a second ago at the start of it, but it's not working now. Right. Yeah, it's now thinking. Okay, it's just having a little think at the moment. I played it earlier to try and avoid this, but it's just decided to stop. There we go. Right, let's move on. Splendid. So this is at the southern part of the site looking north. This is like the present active working areas. You can see that the lining and all the different gas management pipes, leachate management, and here's a misting spray which is part of the odour neutralising. So it's you can walk through there, it's not going to harm you as such, that's just neutralising the odours in the site. Excellent. So this is also part of the site management. There's active bird control on the site with a falconer on site, which is an effective method of dealing with any nuisance birds. And the odour neutralising mist is also present on site. It's also part of active site management to mitigate any impacts of the works. Also on the site there's an extensive gas management system which generates electricity from any landfill gas and burns off any excess gas. The drone footage, which I've already played, I'll see if I can just get back into it. Here we are. So, it's the first one here. You see there's some houses on the bottom right of the picture. This is the cattery, so the objections, this is where the objectors, the nearest residents come to the site are. And objections to the application. So this drone is on the eastern boundary. It's now going to scan to the west. You can see the plant, site operations and distance, active areas, previously restored areas. See part of the water site water management as well, and then it looks further south towards the household site and previously restored landfill areas. And then we've got a second drone footage which shows, you can see the site access here on the left of the image, waste transfer station areas, car parking, site offices. The weighbridge is the wheel washing is around here. The weighbridge is where that haulage lorry is just driving there now. It's where indicating with the mouse. The falconer is just to the right of this image where he's based. And yeah, you've got the site access road here. And to the right of this image, over this area here, is the future Purple Haze allocated mineral extraction area. I hope that's been useful to yourselves. Perfect. Yeah, excellent. Excellent. So, statutory consultation and neighbour notification has taken place. We've had no objections to the application from statutory consultees, parish councils, Environment Agency. We've had 2 objections which have been received from local residents, and this has been set out in the report in paragraph 71. So the main issues proposed as a result of the proposal is visual impact and landscape, which is addressed as part of policy 5 of the core strategy, amenity and health in policy 10, ecology addressed by policy 3, flooding, which was raised by the local objectors, is policy 11, and highways is policy 12. And the recommendation is for granting of planning permission subject to conditions listed in Appendix A, and the updated report and the existing Section 106 obligation. This existing Section 106 obligation, which was varied by deed of variation last year, relates to lorry movements, restricting the use of Harbridge Drove and B381 northwards. Management agreement for nature conservation. Section 106 relating to off-site heathlands and roadworks improvements. And there's a final location plan. Thank you, Chair.
Is this working? Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you to the Chair and Committee for the opportunity to speak to you today. I've just a very short statement to read. The reprofiling proposal at Blue Haze represent an opportunity to maximise the capacity at an existing waste management site, which provides an essential component in the mix of sites required to deliver the current Project Integra contract to 2030. Blue Haze landfill site is the last operational landfill in Hampshire, and while there is a move to drive waste up the waste hierarchy towards recovery, recycling and reuse, of which Veolia is fully supportive, there is still residual waste which does need to go to landfill, certainly in the short term. As has been explained, the proposals will create a 2-metre post-settlement height difference from the existing consented heights, focused on the southern and northern peaks. This represents a very small change in visual appearance. For this, a significant amount of extra void can be created for use up until the end date for the deposit of waste, which is at the end of 2029, as explained. As has been explained, the reason for this extra void is that tipping levels at Blue Haze have remained stable and not dropped as anticipated. Therefore, the remaining void, if current tipping rates remain stable, would be at the end of 2026-27. This would mean there will be no landfill resource in Hampshire to the end of the Integra contract. With this in mind, there are a few options. Firstly, you could export more landfill waste out of Hampshire. Secondly, you could propose and apply for a new landfill site just for those few years. Or third, being the reprofiling option that we are proposing as part of this application. It's strongly argued by Veolia that this third option, this application, provides the best and most sustainable solution with least disruption or inconvenience to local residents and highway users. It should be recognised, as noted in the report, that statutory consultee responses have been positive, with no objections, and while there were 2 local letters of concern or objection, these issues have been addressed within the application. Veolia has provided information for all the queries raised, and we are proactively engaged with the local parish councils. It should be noted that as part of the previous application to extend the site end date to 2029 with the restoration by 2031, Veolia have provided a number of environmental schemes agreed with Hampshire County Council to manage noise, dust, litter, etc., in dovetail with schemes approved under the environmental permit. With regard to ongoing work associated with the establishment of a wildlife corridor at the eastern side of the site, Veolia have been working proactively with Forestry England and their ecologists and Hampshire County Council Planning and the county ecologist to ensure the area is maintained until 2035 and continues to flourish. A recent Veolia-funded bird survey has shown that the type of bird the corridor habitat is looking to attract and also reptiles are present, confirming the ongoing success of this habitat. In terms of restoration, it should be noted that it's proposed to restore the land with a mix of woodland and heathland, as was set out. Just to be clear on this, the landfill itself would predominantly be heathland because this would create a priority habitat over just woodland. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and happy to take any questions.
Do you have any questions of David Bridgewood? Looks as if you've got free. Okay. Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Members, do you have any questions of Kirk, the officer, or indeed any questions regarding the traffic management? Councillor Cooper.
Yes, Kirk Denton, welcome to Regulatory. There's a name to die for. The question relates to the contour systems. I noticed that we have an interfluve here between the Avon on the eastern side and the River Crane on the western side. And the general geomorphology of the area is rising from 45 metres AOD in the south to 50 AOD in the north. And what this does is create two humps at 58 and 59 metres. So it's quite a significant landform in the context of a Hampshire lowland interfluve. We used to have a policy going back a number of years which said no land raising. Yet here we are with an application which was for land raising, and yet we are here again raising the land by another 2 metres. Do you have any comment about the natural geomorphology of the area being significantly changed by this human instigation of a new landform in effect?
No, that's a very good question. We have consulted with our appropriate consultees with landscape, for example, who are the experts in this area, and they've raised no objection to the proposal. And the scheme would be, the site will be already, it's going to be landfill to a certain extent. This is increasing the height of it by 2 metres at the highest point. So in a way that has been considered as part of it, and we consulted with our experts with the landscape within the council, and they haven't raised any objections to it, so I'll be getting my advice from them regarding that matter.
Can I just build on that? We've obviously also consulted our surface water and flood management team. Again, they have raised no objection. They have considered the change in the profile here and raised no objection alongside our landscape colleagues. So we're comfortable with what the experts have advised us, that this will be an acceptable change in the landform.
Thank you. Very briefly on this one. Personally, I'm not really in favour of landfill at all. I think it's kind of a silly idea to be chucking it in the ground when there are many resources that we are putting in landfill that could be used in the future. Having said that, I'd much rather we were doing it in our own county than shipping it out to somebody else. I think that's an even worse situation and gives further environmental problems. So on the basis that we do still have a need for landfill within the county, and I see it continuing for a good number of years to come, I think we have to be supportive of this as a case. I don't really see a better solution at this time, so I will be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Jackman. I suspect we probably all agree with those sentiments. Councillor Cooper.
Chairman, my instinct is to oppose any kind of land raising of this sort, but equally the long-term plan to return it to forestry on the edges and heathland as well, I think is sound. And it's amazing, in fact, how man-made heathland can actually be very enhancing for biodiversity and so on. I've seen a number of examples elsewhere in the county. So I have no objection to the application, despite my reservations about land raising.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess I'm probably just going to repeat what Councillors Cooper and Jackman have said, that I think underneath the surface we probably all would say we don't like landfill. And I guess for the man in the street, this is fairly contradictory. We're trying to do away with landfill and yet we're increasing capacity. So the man in the street would probably have some difficulty with this without knowing the details. But I think has been said by a colleague that the alternative is shipping it out of the county, which environmentally is not at all good. And the key thing is that we are retaining that date at the end of 2029. So on that basis, I'd support it.
Thank you, Chair. I have to support the recommendation articulated in the report. The observation I'd make about land raising is those of you that live to the east of the county will be very aware of the landfill site on the outskirts of Portsmouth, which was almost a mountain in itself. Due to the actions undertaken there, we're now going to have a new country park with hundreds of trees, potentially into the thousands, and as we drive past every day into Portsmouth, it becomes more attractive each day. So hopefully the outcome of this will be similar. Thank you.
Thank you. And I won't repeat what Councillor Jackman said, because obviously I can't bear anything going to landfill. My biggest concern was when I heard the words stable tipping rates. And I find that really frustrating that after all this time we've still got stable tipping rates, that there's still this amount going to landfill. And I think our country deserves better, and we as people should do better. We've got to stop this. And I'm always worried when we expand things like this, or perhaps have a new incinerator or something, that we're not encouraging more recycling, that we're giving people the option to just go and fill our land up. So I don't want to support it because I don't agree with landfill, absolutely fundamentally, and I cannot believe we're still in this position many years on, and we all understand the problems we are stacking up for the future there. But at the same time, I cannot bear the thought that we don't address our own waste. I think the scenes we have seen in Malaysia, in Vietnam, where young children have been bleeding, and it's a result of us. But I just find it so sad that we're sitting here talking about hiding our waste away, and we're not having those conversations at government saying, what are manufacturers doing? Why are we ending up still in this perpetual cycle where we've got a stable tipping rate? That tipping rate should be coming down. We should be saying, actually, we don't think we're going to be able to fill up landfill. I'm sorry, I'm probably getting a little on my high horse about these type of things, but I do think it needs to be said. So I will very, very reluctantly be supporting it because I don't want it going anywhere else. But I think we, as community leaders, need to do more to say this has to stop. And that 2029 really has to be the end. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor. I think the whole of Hampshire, and particularly this committee, is dedicated to achieving nil waste to landfill by 2030. That's what we are all hoping to achieve, and we will do everything we can in order to do so. Just at the present time, there aren't enough recycling waste resources available to enable us to eliminate it now, and that's why we need that additional capacity in the short term. Lisa, you want to speak on that?
Yeah, just to clarify a few points in relation to that. Obviously, we've discussed about the waste hierarchy, and as I've said previously and a bit earlier, landfill is at the bottom of that hierarchy. However, it's very clear from the application that at the moment there is still a need to deal with this residual waste. And so maximising the ability of an existing site to do that is obviously preferable to looking for other alternatives, either within Hampshire or exporting. And I just wanted to draw your attention to policy 32. You can see policy 32 of the plan, which is the policy relating to landfill, identifies a number of sites, including Blues Haze, within it. All the other sites in that policy have not come forward and have not been implemented. So this is our only option. Pound Bottom has closed, Squab Wood has closed, and Purple Haze, the planning application at Purple Haze, has come forward without a proposal to do any landfilling. So this is our last option of a site that we've currently got. So maximising the ability for that site to do that where it's acceptable, and this application we consider it to be acceptable, is of course preferable, and of course is supported by the other policies in the plan. But I think, I take your points on board about, the landfilling, and I think our waste management team are actively looking at ways to try and encourage reuse and recovery, and indeed not creating the waste in the first place. So I think there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes at the County Council in the waste management team, which are looking at trying to maximise the waste that we do produce into a resource. So we're not in a position that we have to deal with residual wastes in the way that we are currently. So hopefully that gives you a bit of certainty that this is certainly on the council's radar, and I would expect to see more messages from our waste management team, and I certainly know there are campaigns coming that address a lot of the issues that we've got before us. But the key thing is about that maximisation of the site that we have already got. And just finally, before I hand back, the Heatham restoration here is quite significant, and Councillor Cooper mentioned it about the preferable restoration here. We are seeking as an authority ways to try and maximise Heatham restoration, and this site is a really good example of one that the ecology team and other interested parties are working together to maximise Heatham restoration. So that's a real positive in terms of the restoration that can be proposed, can be delivered here, certainly in terms of the ecological value that could be created. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can now go to the vote on this item. So that is set out at the beginning of item 7, recommendation that planning permission be granted subject to the updated conditions listed in Appendix A, Section 106 obligations set out in the Section 106 agreement dated the 30th of April 1999 and is varied by a deed of variation dated the 4th of November 2020. That includes obligations for various things set out in that recommendation. Those in favour of that recommendation?
Sixteen in favour.
Okay, I think that's unanimous then. So thank you to everyone for your attendance today. Good meeting. See you all again in September for more fun. Okay.